half of all workers in their 50s will lose their job involuntarily.
Yep.
And if you lose your job involuntarily, only 10% of those people will make the same amount that they did before they were pushed out. And some of that, can be
staggering
from a caregiving or, or other issues. But we think of people having this career that lasts forever until people decide when to retire.
Yep.
And unfortunately, that's not true in the data. And there's a lot of people who want to work or need to work. They can't find jobs because people won't hire them.
Welcome to It Gets Late Early. I am so honored and delighted to have with me here today Dr. Debra Whitman of AARP. She is the Chief Public Policy Officer at the organization, and she's a real powerhouse. And she's written an incredibly important book that everybody's got to go get their hands on, which I happen to have in my hot little hands here, called The Second 50, which is all about how, man, life is changing, and we're getting a lot more of it. So Deb, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate your time and your attention to all these things that actually, they really impact all of us. So grateful.
Maureen, thanks for having me. I'm so excited to talk to you today.
Wonderful. Well, I've also had the pleasure of meeting you in person, which was so much fun back in Seattle. Feels like forever ago. What is time anymore? But had the chance to see you on stage talking about the book alongside some other leaders in the Seattle community. And you did such an excellent job framing up the reasons why you wrote this book. And I know, because we've spoken and I've also read your book, one of the reasons that you got into this, but it's interesting to me to see someone who's devoted so much of her life to caring for and advocating for people who at a lot of that time were not including you, essentially. Like, you weren't part of the group that you would call an older adult. So what was it that really drove you into this field? Because you've been in it for 25 plus years at this point?
Yeah, I feel like most of my life at this point. I think my focus on aging really started in my childhood because my grandmother lived with my family. So around age 5, we moved to Washington State from Phoenix, where I was born. And my grandmother lived with us throughout her life. And so my mom was her caregiver for the next 50 years. My grandmother had schizophrenia. So needed help sometimes, but we were very, very close. And she was super loving and made the best of in roles. And so just that connection with somebody who's older and seeing them, even with health struggles, as a valuable member of your family and somebody that gives you love and that you love back, I think really put me on the path of the work that I do. And so I went from there to working on issues like Social Security at the Social Security Administration. Hot topic right now.
Sure
I worked in Congress for about a decade, working on healthcare and long-term care and retirement security. And I ran the Senate Special Committee on Aging for a time. And then I've been here at AARP, where I focus on doing our research, our public policy work, our thought leadership, and I even have a team that does brain health. So still working on aging for 25 years. And I think that set me up for knowing a lot about aging, except that when I was about to hit 50 myself, I realized there was a whole lot that I didn't know. And so that's really why I decided to write the book, is like, if after all of that at age 50, I didn't know enough about the second 50, I thought maybe some other people don't as well.
Right. People might have a thing or two to learn if you do not know everything about it, right? That's wild.
Well, and it's complicated, right? There's a lot of things that affect us in the second half of our life. And, so I really wanted to talk to experts and learn from them. I wanted to dig in the data. I wanted to talk to people who were aging themselves or experiencing some of the things. And so I wrote down questions that I had about what the second half of life would be like. And those are everything from, sort of the basics. How long will I live? Will I be healthy? To some of the more practical things, like how long will I work? Will I have enough money in retirement to live on? And then some of the scary questions that I actually wanted to think about, like, will I lose my memory and how will I die? And so I wrote those questions down, and that's the chapters of the book. And also, what's been great is there are people at different stages of their lives interested in different questions. And so I spoke to a senior center in LA a few weeks ago, and they wanted to know all about the Will I Lose My Memory chapter. And I've talked to people like you that think a lot about work, right? And so we talk a lot about how long will I work? And so it's been a good opportunity to talk about the many issues that I work on in my day job, but also to really dive in and learn things that I didn't know, or be told that I was wrong about things that I thought I knew.
It changes everything, right? I love that you
Yeah.
went on this journey. And I mean, the fact that you grew up with your grandma and you had this role model and this woman who was a different generation from you that you were so close with, that must have inspired in you a reverence for people of an older generation. I had a similar situation in that I was really close with a grandparent, but I know that intergenerational homes are not as prevalent as they used to be in our culture. So I think you had a
Actually, you're
really unique
wrong.
insight. I'm wrong? Oh my gosh.
You are
See,
wrong.
wow.
And I thought so too until I looked at the data, and it's becoming there's this, yes, it was for a while, and particularly during the pandemic, but even since even before the pandemic, more and more families were moving in together with multi-generations. And
Wow.
a piece of that's probably housing costs.
I'm sure.
A
Big
piece
part.
of that is need for care, either child care or elder care. But no, we are like going back to the traditional multifamily house, but we don't build multifamily houses.
No, we
That's one of
don't.
the
We
things
don't.
I
That's an
learned
issue,
about too.
right? Yeah. No,
Yeah.
that's true. But yeah, it's something that it's funny because on one hand, I'm like, oh, that's great. We're gonna have intergenerational homes, but as you point out, like some of the reasons for it are not necessarily like great, right? Like we're forced into this situation that isn't optimal for some issues that we have that are systemic in nature, right? But the I guess the flip side, the silver lining of that is that we'll get to have really close relationships with people of different ages, which will hopefully boost our engagement and advocacy for people and help us see things from other perspectives and learn more. So there's that, I guess. Searching for silver linings. Okay.
No,
So
there's huge silver linings. Like I said, even growing up with my grandmother who had health issues, the lessons that I took with that were mostly love.
Mhm.
And then also how important our systems are to help support people who need help.
Absolutely. And that underpins so much of your book, which I really love because you do speak often about the systems within all of these different institutions and how they set some people up in a way that's optimal and others not so much. And it's not, everybody isn't handed the same deck of cards, right? And so there's so much nuance in this conversation, which I love that you weave throughout because I think it's a really important piece of it that so often gets lost.
Thank you for that. We don't live our first 50 all the same, and we certainly don't all age the same. And in fact, there's huge differences in just basically how long we're going to live in this country, huge differences. So, I knew women live longer than men. I wasn't sure why. That was a big rabbit hole that I went down. But American women live 6 years longer, right? So we need to plan for that. We know that there's huge differences by education. If you have a college degree, you're going to live 7 years longer. There's huge differences by wealth in this country. The top 1% live a decade longer than the
That's
bottom 1%.
insane.
A decade.
Insane.
And if you look, right now, our zip code is more predictive of our life expectancy than our genetic code. The
Fascinating.
differences between the highest and lowest counties is 20 years. And even just across, large metropolitan areas, you can get easily 20 years of difference in life expectancy. And so, some of those are clusters of people with higher income and higher education in some neighborhoods and not others. But some of it is often, access to healthcare or, toxic environments that cut our lives short, a whole range of things. So one of the last chapters that I write is, how can we have a better aging society for everybody? How can we make sure that everybody can live a longer and healthy life? Even though the chapters themselves are about what people can do and about what the data shows, we can do better in this country.
We have some room for improvement. I think we should
We
put
have some.
ourselves on a little bit of a pip of sorts. But yeah, I really think that's such an incredibly important part of this conversation. And so I really value that you put the work into actually having that be a main part of this conversation that you have in the book, because it's so easy for, and I've said it myself, like very flippantly, like, oh, well, we're all living older. Well, we aren't all, we aren't all getting older. Or sorry, I should say that differently. We aren't all going to have 100 years on this planet. Like you point out, the discrepancies are incredibly vast and it's inequitable for sure. And so I love that that's called out. I think it's especially today with the widening income gap and the haves and the have-nots, that gulf becoming bigger and bigger all the time. It's a really incredibly important piece of the puzzle that must be called out, in my view. So thank you.
And we have a lot of sort of shame, let's just say, like, I don't have $1 million saved for retirement that people say I should have. Well, first, most people don't.
Right.
But second of all, maybe you worked for a job that never offered you a retirement plan.
Right.
And
like, what's a
or
pension?
a nice match or a pension.
Mm-hmm.
And so, there are things about the way we've set up our country that just really make it hard to age well in America. Like, I'll give you another example. Medicare doesn't cover your ears, your eyes, or your teeth. Now, these are 3 body parts that age with you and that are really expensive. I talked to one woman who needed major dental work. It ate up almost all of her retirement savings. And so, again, we have individuals blaming themselves for structural problems that we should be fixing.
That point right there. Thank you. It's so critical that we call that out. And one of the things I really loved about your book is not only was it heavy on the data and the aha moments, like, oh my gosh, 20 years difference in life expectancy base. I mean, more due to your zip code than your genetic code. Like, it blew my mind. But you also brought in all these personal stories. These people shared with you some really vulnerable information about what their worldview was, what happened to them, their fears, their dreams, their hopes, etc. And that was a really cool aspect of the book too.
Thank you for that. I think talking to people was one of the most fun, both experts, but really individuals. And can I share one story that was really poignant with you? So the Will I Lose My Memory chapter, I wanted to talk to somebody with Alzheimer's. And we were able to connect with Terry Montgomery, who leads Black Dementia Minds. And she shared a story about what she's going through. And a key point that she really wanted people to listen to is, you're not dead the day of your diagnosis, right? You actually still have a lot of memories and capacities, and those decline over time. And she had a beautiful metaphor about living in a mansion, and it has all these rooms and all these places. And slowly, as you progress in the disease, some rooms are closed off to you. So at first it's the garage. You can no longer drive. And then she talked about not being able to cook. So the kitchen is closed and the office is closed and she can't work. But there's still a whole parts of the house where she can be with her family and do different things. And so to me, to have somebody with the disease talk about the disease was hugely enlightening. I talked to a palliative care nurse about what it's like to sit next to somebody as they die. I've never had that experience. My husband has with both of his parents. These are the things that I wanted to know, and I think make the conversation even more rich.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you for sharing those and sharing them throughout the book too. It was really uplifting to hear these lessons from people being passed down and helpful, because, so much of this we kind of kick down the road, right? Like, we kick the can down the road on planning for so much. It's just a very human thing. And I love in your book, you also call out how you've been working in this field, advocating for older people for your whole career. And yet, like, you came to a point where you're like, I thought aging kind of happened to other people, but not me. And it's weird how human that is, right? We don't think it's going to happen to us. I'm like, what is this wrinkle? Like, how, right?
Or I know it's going to happen, but I just hadn't I hadn't realized I won't be able to stay in my house until I had my father-in-law's 94-year-old girlfriend over. And she looked at the 6 steps. I have a split level to go upstairs or downstairs, like they're Mount Kilimanjaro. And I was like, oh, those are nothing to me now, but they're going to be a problem one day, probably.
It
And
is
so,
so
it's
interesting.
not modifiable in my home. So, I have to accept that at one day I will have to sell this house and move someplace else.
Yeah.
And I don't. I'm actually fine with that. My parents love their home, and so I went through every question with them, and I learned so much about them. And even if you're under 50, you should get this book so you understand your parents, and you should ask them the questions, because that was I think one of the greatest gifts of writing the book. But what I learned from them is they love their house. They live on a lake. They have this beautiful view. And the most important thing to them, my mom just turned 89, my dad will soon, is that they stay there. And so, now I'm like, okay, well, here's what we're going to have to do in order to make sure you can stay there.
Yeah. And what you just described is something that so many people are going through. And, it's the sandwich thing, right? It's the caregiving that you don't necessarily, I mean, a lot of people I don't think really prepare for. And I think it's because, in part, it's very human not to want to look into the future in that way and think of someone who might need additional support. And, I view my parents and my older relatives, and I don't want to think about that. It's so hard for me to think about them not being able to be the people they are today. And of course, going back to a lot that's in your book, everybody ages differently, right? And some people are going to be, I mean, gosh, I had coffee with an 89-year-old ex-judge last week, 0 hearing aids, sharp as a tack, better shape than I am. Like another 89-year-old we hung out with 2 weeks ago, pilot, performed surgery. I mean, everybody ages differently. So you just don't know. But there is, a percentage chance that it could go in that regard, in that realm in some way, right? And you have to be prepared to meet that moment. And it's just something that I think really rocks a lot of people and is hard to get out in front of. So I think, books like this can be really helpful in forcing these conversations. And like you said, something really beautiful came out of it for you. You had these deep, meaningful discussions with your parents that, it's a gift that you've had them, right?
Yeah. I a simple question I asked my mom was about her funeral and what kind of funeral she wanted. And she said, honey, whatever you want. And then I said, no, Mom, actually, I really, we would like to give you the funeral you would want. And she said, oh, actually, I want 2 funerals. And I want this and I want that. And it was great. She was afraid to tell me. I was afraid to ask. And now I understand she wants 2 funerals, and she will have 2 funerals because we had that conversation. So, um, you know, if people have strong, throughout our lives, we want things that we want, right? And we have our reasons for them. And there's no less wanting at age 89 than there is at age 20. I've got 22-year-olds. So, or 54. And so, really thinking through what's important to you at different stages of your life. What am I capable of? What are the supports I have around me? What do I need to put? I think, we do that when we have kids, and we need to continue to be thinking that that's a natural part of life at many different stages.
Absolutely. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the study itself that went into creating so many of the insights in the book, because I know that you didn't only poll people who were, in their quote second 50. You also incorporated people from earlier in their lives. So tell us a little bit about some of the research that actually backed the book.
Yes, we did a national survey, and I have an awesome research team here at AARP, and we did a national survey and asked questions around each of the chapters. And we did it, I think it was 25-year-olds and up, and we tried to oversample to, find enough people over age 80, so we could get some insights. People at age 30 are different than people at age 50. People at age 50 are different than people at age 80. One great finding is that we're happier as we age. There's been lots of research on this, what they call the U-shaped curve of happiness. So you're happiest when you're young. You sort of bottom out in your 40s and 50s. And then you're twice as happy as in your 40s and 50s in your 70s and 80s and beyond. And I think that's a sense of perspective, but it's held true across multiple studies. And I think it's also true that the little things people overlook as they age. So we also asked, are you healthy? And people would say, yes, I'm healthy. And then we'd say, well, do you have heart disease or diabetes or like check, check, check.
Like, yeah. So
But
what?
they still consider themselves healthy,
Right.
right? They're healthier than maybe, the person, down the hall, or they're healthier than they thought they'd be at this age, or they're healthier because they can still do the things that they want to do. So I think the lessons from the survey were people get happier when they age, which everybody thinks, oh, I don't really want to be 80. That's a miserable time in life. That's less true. And that people don't want to talk about death, particularly at older ages. They're seeing it among their friends and family. They're perfectly comfortable. Again, not every single person, but these are conversations that often, as I found with my mom, people want to have.
I mean, that is so great that you were able to pull all of that in, and that you were talking to so many people at different ages and stages, right? And I think you're absolutely right. It can look so different to a person, really. So I'm glad you incorporated such a wide range. It's really critical. But
I was thinking for your audience, there was one question that was, I think, useful. It's, when do you think you'll retire, and when do you actually retire?
Oh, great. Yeah, let's do that one.
And a lot of people expect to work longer than they do. And
Interesting.
And as I think you talk a lot about in the podcast, a lot of people are pushed out of their work when they really want to stay in it. In fact, I talked to this researcher from the Urban Institute, Rich Johnson, who's a longtime friend of mine. Half of all workers in their 50s will lose their job involuntarily. And if you lose your job involuntarily, only 10% of those people will make the same amount that they did before they were pushed out. And some of that, can be from a caregiving or other issues. But, we think of people having this like career that lasts forever until people decide when to retire. And unfortunately, that's not true in the data. And there's a lot of people who want to work or need to work. They can't find jobs because people won't hire them.
It's such a persistent issue, and ageism is just so embedded in our society, really from pretty much the day we're born. And I've had experiences with my own children where they're like, "You're old, Mom," and I'm like, "Who taught you that was a bad thing? Like, what are you talking?" And it's the media. Honestly, there's a lot of media out there that's geared towards kids that it is embedded with all these messages. So we have so much to unlearn, and it's interesting that despite all of this ageism, people in their older years tend to be happier, right? And it's like, gosh, I want that message to get out, right? Like, this is getting older is not bad. In fact, look at all these people who are thriving, right?
Well, and it's important for employers to keep their older workers. So we've done a lot of work with the OECD that shows that multi-generational teams, having mixed people of different ages work together, those teams are so much more productive because you get the values of experience. And we've tried that 10 times, but somebody comes up with a new way to try it the 11th time. And so and there's a huge cost to our economy. Our economy would be
Massive.
$850 billion bigger if we didn't have age discrimination. We are literally wasting tons of talent and resources in our society by not valuing the experience and wisdom of older workers. And so I know this is a huge message of your podcast. So I just wanted to touch on some of the data there.
No, I'm really glad you did. It's of critical importance, and the data doesn't lie. As you said, this is a reality, and what's actually happening is that people aren't in charge of their own future in the way in which they would have imagined they would be. And that is deeply unfair, and it's a systemic injustice, and I despise it, but it's real. And so people need to be thinking ahead about this. And I think ageism is one of those things. It's the universal ism that gets us all. But I think it does take a lot of people by surprise. And it's, certainly for white guys, it's the first ism they'll ever face, right? And it's like, wait, what is this, right? So it's interesting to see that shock.
Well, and it's not just bad for your bank account. And maybe your listeners want to hear how they can live longer.
Yeah. Yes, everybody. We're listening.
Everybody wants that. But let me tell you the most important thing you can do to live longer and healthier. You're going to say, oh, I have to exercise. The most important thing you can do is to actually have a positive view of aging. If you think that growing older is a time of wisdom and purpose and meaning, you live 7.5 years, 7.5 years longer. You have lower rates of heart disease, even the brain volume. Comparing people who have a positive view and negative view after they've passed, and brain volume is higher. The dementia rates are lower. So just this negative self-aging is toxic, because you limit then your possibilities and you limit your interactions, and you say, oh, well, I shouldn't go to that because that's not for older people, when you should go dance, right? You should go surf, go do whatever that you're physically able to do. So that number one way to be healthier is that having a sense of purpose is also really important to our health and longevity. The community that you have, having good relationships are really important. I interviewed Bob Baldinger, who's done the Harvard study of adult development, which has looked at people their whole lives. And he looked at healthy 80-year-olds and unhealthy 80-year-olds. And he said, well, what were they doing when they were 50 to live long? Why are they different? And it wasn't their cholesterol and it wasn't their diet. It was that they had strong relationships. And so that's also important, your connections. And then I'll give you the 5 easy ones. So these are the ones that everybody thinks about. So you do these 5 habits, you live about a decade longer. It is eat right. It is exercise. Don't smoke. Don't drink too much or not at all, and maintain a healthy body weight. That'll give you over a decade of longevity. But even if you do just one, it gives you an extra 2 years. So
yeah,
every little bit helps. But I'm telling you, if you think more positively about your future, that's the best health behavior you can have.
That one blew me away. And I think it's a wonder and a marvel that women outlive men, given the fact that positive view of aging is so critical to your longevity. Like, what? We're told to anti-age everything and, Botox it all, right? It's so funny.
Well, the difference is, and I do share this story, my husband almost passed away in his late 40s with a heart attack. It was ironically called the Widowmaker. And luckily, he asked for help. He was hiking, and some hikers helped call 911, and Boulder Mountain Rescue ran up the Flatirons, for anybody who's listening to this in Colorado, and carried him back down. And a brilliant cardiologist was able to save his life. But it was because he asked for help. And one of the differences between women living longer and men living longer is, going to the doctor and getting things taken care of when, or not ignoring the things that you shouldn't ignore. So there's a whole bunch of behavioral issues of why men live shorter lives. Our biology also protects us, us women. So most female species live longer than male species just because of hormones as well.
That story you shared in the book was harrowing. And I went to the doctor because of reading it and checked my own heart out. So I was having I started going to Orange Theory, which is, that exercise class where you're on the treadmill and you're pumping pretty hard. And I went from basically like not doing much to just all out sprint in those classes. And I was like, gosh, I really feel like this chest pain, what's going on? And freaked out, went and got an echocardiogram. And then they're like, just to be sure, let's do this treadmill stress test. And turned out I was okay, but it was reading the story that you had with your husband, where it was just like out of nowhere. He's relatively healthy anyway. And so I went. It turns out I had just like not exercised in a long time and basically like pulled something in there. So it was a false alarm, but I was glad that I got it checked out. I don't want to chance it. It's your heart. You don't want to chance that.
It's your heart. And women feel heart attacks differently.
Yeah.
and our backs and things that,
Yeah.
often we don't know what's happening. So
And there's
that's actually really, I'm very happy to hear that. That's,
yes. Yes. I
um,
mean, your story sent one person to the doctor. So thank you. And
there
I'm
we
sure
go.
plenty
I,
more. But
you
you're
know,
right. It's an important thing to ask for help and to be proactive. If you don't have health, you don't have much else, right? So it's really,
yeah,
it's critical. So thank you for sharing that. And I'm so glad that he got the help and everything's okay. My gosh, harrowing,
yeah.
terrifying.
It
Ugh.
was really scary. I
Ah.
have to admit.
We've covered a lot of wonderful ground here, but I want to ask you, you took on this book writing and went on this sort of quest to find out more about the second 50. Once you got through the process of writing the book and learning all of this information, have there been any changes that you've made in the way that you are moving forward in your second 50?
I'm trying to exercise more. I'm not Orange Theory, but at least,
Yeah.
get my heart rate up a few times a week, do some strength training. I do a Pilates class with a 70-year-old partner every
Oh,
Friday morning. So the eating right and the exercising part. But I was really, the part about relationships also really touched me. And so, I'm trying to make plans. I was just having my phone with a couple friends this weekend because I've been
good.
traveling so much for the book. I haven't seen my friends. And so, making those kind of connections, keeping up with people that are important to me and thinking about that as just a really good part of life.
Yeah.
I'm not doing it just as, instead of taking a vitamin D, I'm doing it because it will make my life better. And now I have the data, it'll make my life healthier longer, but it's also, that's what a good life is. And so, trying to think of what are the things that are most important to me for the next 50 years. The other thing about writing the book is time, is just thinking about time. So I'm now almost 55 and I'm like, oh my God, I've got potentially this whole, decades ahead of me. What do I want to do now? What do I want to do later? What are the things that are really time consuming, like traveling all over Asia that I want to do and spend 2 years, right? So where in my life am I going to fit that? So, just trying to think of how we can use the time that we have on this planet for the range of things that we want to do.
And the shift in perspective from, I'm getting older to, wow, I have potentially like another 45 years to go. What should we do? Let's go, like, get on in the car. Let's jump in. Let's roll. Right. Like, I love that. It's
Well,
so
and so many
cool.
people get their AARP card and they're like, oh my God, I'm 50.
Yeah.
And I'm like, yay, you're
Yeah. Woo!
50.
Here we
Look what
go.
you've done. And you know what? There's a
Yeah.
whole second 50 to think about now.
Right. I think that's beautiful. And it's such an uplifting message. And I know that it's been really galvanizing for me to think about, I get this second chance and, not everybody does. And tomorrow isn't promised to anyone. And to view it as a gift is, I think, a really good reframe. And I just feel so much more confident in my second half of life. Or I guess I'm not quite there. I'm 42, or hopefully, who knows, right? Like we said. But I feel so much more confident and capable and self-assured. And like, I know whatever happens, I'll sort through it. And that's not something I can say I felt earlier in my life. I wish I had, because gosh, it would have been a funner ride. But it's been a really uplifting and remarkable thing to get to this point where I just sort of have this inherent trust in myself. And yeah, it's been great. So no one tells you about that, I feel. And so,
Well, I think there is this, largely through Hollywood and many stars looking amazing in their 50s, doing amazing things. Not just look at, people look how they look. That's not the sign of aging well, but there's people doing really interesting work and seeing that they've got, a depth of experience and talent that they can use for all kinds of things. So that's that. I think the conversation, particularly around women aging, has pivoted. I'm not going to say 180, but it's a broader conversation, I think, than it used to be.
I mean, the stories are getting told, period, in a way that they weren't
Yeah.
before, right? You're seeing main characters on the movie screen who are in their 50s and beyond. They're not some bit character. They're not playing some trope of an older person. They're like fully formed characters with relationships and storylines and plot lines that are compelling and cool and different, right? And that is a shift, I think, that I'm very galvanized by and excited to see, because I think it trickles down into everything else.
I think so too. And I think women are talking about health issues like menopause that,
Mm-hmm.
were verboten for so many years. And I think, part of that is inspired by younger generations talking about their health issues, like having a period as
Absolutely.
if it's,
Yep.
just a
No big
part of
deal.
life,
Yeah.
which it is.
Because it isn't a big deal, right? Because it is, right? Like,
Yeah.
that's so true. I think that's been really wonderful to behold. And I'm excited to see it continue. I think it will. Very excited about that. And I hope that it starts broaching into the workplace a little bit, right? Like, I want to see these stereotypes about older workers be pushed aside. I want to see examples of older workers who are killing it in their careers and coming back for a second act and reinventing themselves. And I think, especially in the age of AI and with so much disruption in so many industries, we're going to see a lot. Another silver lining, we're going to see a lot of new entrepreneurs who are over age 40 and a lot of new companies that are born out of this essentially necessity, right? Necessity is the mother of invention, and all this job loss and outsourcing and AI, I think, is going to unfurl that. So that excites me because those people will have the experience of decades of work and life, right? And hopefully they will move forward and actually end up employing other people similarly situated, as well as people across the age spectrum, because as you noted, and as we talk about all the time on the show, intergenerational teams are the best and have the most innovation. And for companies that care about productivity and making money, which I think is pretty much everyone, that's like a really important thing to hone in on that I think is getting left off the table for some odd reason. So hopefully that'll change.
Well, and also if they want to solve the problem of the fastest growing demographic, then they need to have people who are living in that demographic also.
Right? It's so common
Yeah, over
sense,
50
but
cents of every dollar is spent by somebody over age 50. And so, if you're trying to sell anything, then you should be looking at how does this work for an aging body? And some companies are doing really interesting things and really creative in this space. And I think that that's also changing. Brands are seeing a huge and growing market. Places like L'Oreal are dropping some of its ageist language around, anti-aging creams, and they're celebrating their older workforce as well. So I'm really hopeful that it's a business imperative that more and more companies are seeing.
So one thing that I know continues to kind of plague older people is sort of the common perception that they're taking jobs from younger people, that they're kind of staying too long, quote unquote, in the workforce. I had one guest come on and said, "Get the boomers the heck out of the workforce. Like they're gumming up the whole system. And what about all the young people and the talent we need to develop?" And I was like, "Ooh boy,
He's on the
okay,
wrong
deep breath."
podcast.
Yeah, I was like, "Okay, honey." But we had a great conversation. I think I made some headway. Anyway, can you tell us a little bit about that concept and why it's such a sticky thing? And can you maybe, I don't know, debunk it for us? Because that'd be great.
Yeah, I think for any one job, you can think about that, right? Like that guy has the job I want. I need that guy to leave.
Yeah.
But it's certainly not true for the economy as a whole. Like
Mm.
in economics, there's a term called the lump of labor fallacy. You don't have to memorize that term, but it basically means that we only have so many jobs, and anyone who's taking one job means somebody else doesn't get one. That's not the way the economy works. Actually, the more workforce we have, the more we grow as an economy, and there's more jobs. So, when women entered the workforce, the U.S. economy grew substantially. It's the same. We actually have a decreasing labor force in most of the world who's aging. The U.S. is still, I think we're still about equal, but soon we're going to have fewer workers than the number of jobs we have today. And we're going to need to keep every older worker. We're going to need to try and entice them. I never want to force somebody to work longer. Let me just be clear. There's a lot of reasons people leave because they want to, because they have to care for somebody else, because they have health issues. There's lots of people who don't want to work till 80. But we certainly will need the people that do want to work and make sure that they have good jobs available. in order to keep our economy growing. And so that's the difference. If you assume there's only X number of jobs, that was true when we still had more and more workers coming in. It's less and less true as we're going to have more jobs than workers. And again, AI is going to play in all this, but it's just an economic fallacy that having more older workers is ruining the labor market for younger workers. We need both.
I wish I'd known about the lump of labor fallacy when I was having that conversation. I would have sounded so smart. And like, mic drop.
And older workers are complements for younger workers, right?
We
As
need
we just
mentors,
talked about, we need mentors. We need people to say, okay, this is how this works, and then I'm going to teach you. We need systems that are consistent. So the workers of different ages are complementary, even how they think. Older workers have different cognitive abilities. They are going to make fewer mistakes. They're going to, have a broader perspective on things. Younger people are going to be a little bit faster. So again, cognitively, we are complements. Labor force, we're complements. And speaking of surveys, we surveyed people. People want to work with other generations.
Yes.
And so,
give the people what
even
they want.
even creating a workforce that is, has diversity of all kinds. That's what people want to work with. So again, good for the economy, good for the employer, and good for the workers themselves.
Well, and AARP does so much good. I remember seeing that study in the survey that led us to consider $850 billion loss by virtue of just being ageist in our society.
That's my team.
Right? Your team and you, what amazing work. And I think, AARP is such a powerhouse and does so much for literally all of us, because we all aspire to be older one day, right? And all the benefits of treating people better who are older, I think, really do come down and hit all of society too. But I think it's so incredible what you all do on the daily, and the fight that you have in you to continue this in the face of so many challenges, including what we're seeing right now unfold with, the threats to Social Security, on which so many of us rely, right? So I really want to tip my hat to you and your team, because it's critical. It's absolutely critical. And I feel like you guys don't get enough credit. So hat tip. Thank you.
Thank you.
On behalf of literally all of us.
I appreciate that on behalf of the amazing people that I work with every day. They are so passionate.
Such a great team. I've been fortunate enough to meet many of them, and actually hosted Naj Uddin, the CIO from AARP, on this here podcast. So it's been just a pleasure, and to support in any way, shape, or form that I can what AARP is doing. That's 100% going to be something I will keep pushing. So.
Well, we love allies.
We all need them, right? We all need them. But thank you for writing this book. Thank you so much for spending some of your time. I know it's hard to do, so I really appreciate it. I know you're on the book tour and doing so much policy work as well. So appreciate you being here and sharing all your insights with this audience.
It's been really fun to talk to you. And again, you've been banging the drum on the issues of, making sure that we have access to good jobs as we age, which I think is also so important to talk to people about those realities and why they shouldn't be that way.
They really shouldn't be there. And it gets late early, so everyone's going to be here at some point, right? If they're lucky. So let's make it better. Thank you so much, Deb.